So in the last video, we learned how to create a sign-up system inside our website, just as an exercise to learn how to use all the different things we learned up until now inside this course. And we still need to create a login system since now we have people signing up inside the website, but we also need them to be able to log into the website. So what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to start up inside our login.inc.php file, because this is the file that we need to start in order to, when the user goes inside our login form and submits the username and password, they send that information to this page. So we can actually log them inside our website from within this page here. So in the same sense as we did inside our signup.inc.php file, we're just going to go ahead and check for a server request method, just like last time. We're going to go in and make sure we do that to begin with. So we're going to open up our PHP tags and we're simply going to check for a request method that is going to be a post method. So if the user got to this page legitimately by actually submitting the form post, just like with our sign-up system, then we do want to run some code inside this file here. So the first thing we're going to do is actually grab the data. So in the same sense as we did in the last one, you can see there's a lot of copy pasting because we did the same things already. We're going to go and grab the username and password from within our login form. And just to show you, if I were to go back inside my index page, I do have a login form and I do have a sign up form. And inside my login form, I do have two inputs, one for the username and one for the password. So not anything for, I think, a email, which we had in the sign-up system, because we don't need to log in using a email. So going back inside our login.inc.php file, I do also want to make sure that if the user actually got to this page illegitimately, so if they did not submit a request method called post, then I do want to go down and write a else statement. Again, just like inside our sign-up form. So if we were to go in here, scroll down to the bottom, you can see that we have a else statement that simply sends them back to the front page and kills off this script here. So if we were to go back inside our login, you can see that we just simply paste that in, and that is all we need for now, at least. And then we have a basic structure of, sending the user back if they did not get here properly. So what I want to do now is I want to go below our username and password that we grabbed using the post methods, and I want to go in and do a try catch block. Just like, again, in the last episode. So if we were to go in here, you can see that we do have a try catch block where we go in and we try some code. And if it fails, then we do want to catch an exception and actually, write whatever error that might have happened inside the website. So we know that an error has happened. So again, we're just going to go and copy the catch block at the end here. And we're going to go back in and we're going to replace the catch block that I auto-generated using the tab functionality we have inside editors typically. So I'm just going to go and replace that. And now we do have the ability to catch a PDO exception if something were to go wrong. So now all we have to do inside this try block up here is actually run the code that is going to allow for us to check for error handlers and check, if the user should be logged into the website. If there were no error messages, then of course, we do want to log them in. So what we're going to do to begin with is, first of all, I do want to make sure that I create a login controller, a login model, and a login view, just like we did in the last episode when it came to the sign up, because we do need to go in and create these different functions that has something to do with different tasks. Again, we're going to try and implement this MVC model system so you can get a little bit familiar with it when you get into object-oriented PHP, which I did just upload a crash course on object-oriented PHP, and I will include that inside this playlist here as the next episode, because I do think it's a very good idea for you to know about object-oriented PHP. So we're going to get into object-oriented PHP after this video here. And I just want to say, don't freak out, because a lot of people do think object-oriented PHP is very difficult, but it's really not. You just need to have someone explain it to you in a beginner-friendly sort of way. So it's really not difficult to learn object-oriented PHP. It's just you need to have it explained properly. And that way you can get eased into it, and then you'll realize that, oh, okay, so this is actually pretty easy. So we're going to do that in the next episode. So please watch that one, even though it's not labeled number 30 or something inside this course here, because it is relevant to what we're going to do in the future inside this course here. But for now, let's go ahead and create these different controller, model, and views inside our files here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside my includes folder, and I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this one login underscore controller, or CONTR .inc.php. I'm just going to copy everything here. And I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to name this one the same thing, except for controller, we're going to say model. Then I'm going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to call it view. So login underscore view.inc.php. I'm going to go ahead and link to these files we just created because we do need to use some of the functions inside these files. So we do need to have them available to us inside what we have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to require underscore once. And I want to require these files one at a time. So the first one is going to be login. Actually, I can just copy paste here because I did actually copy it. I'm going to copy this down 2 more times because we do actually need to get the database connection first. That is the first one we need to grab. So we're going to say dbh.inc.php, which is the database connection that we created over here, which is just a very basic file that connects to the database and then creates a PDO object, which I do explain in that next episode, by the way, because we do go over objects in the next episode. And then we can use this PDO connection object in order to connect to our database. Again, this is something we learned in the last episode, but since I recorded that a while back, I thought, why not just mention it again. So going inside our login.inc.php file, we do need to make sure we have this connection. And then we're going to go down and say we want to grab the model, and then we want to grab the controller. And the order here does matter. So you do need to have the connection first, then the model, and then the controller. So now taking a look at what we did in the last episode, you can actually see that we immediately started doing error handlers inside this script here. And we're going to do the same thing when it comes to login system. So instead of doing things a little bit out of order like we did in the last episode, because that might be easier for you to understand, now you do know exactly what these error handlers do, why we create this empty errors array, why we do these if conditions down here, why we do need to want to have this config_session, why we do need to check for if we had any sort of errors inside the array, because then we need to send the user back with an error message. So we do have some things in here that we're going to repeat inside the other file. So we're going to go and copy everything from when we actually check if the array that is called errors have any sort of errors inside of it, all the way up till the comment where I wrote error handlers. Then we're going to go back inside the login file, go down and simply paste that in. So right now we are creating an empty array called errors, which is going to contain any sort of errors you might be getting inside the website. And in this case, because we're doing a login system and not a sign-up system, of course, this is going to change a little bit because you might not want to check for as many things. For example, why do we check for an email when it's a login system? We don't have any emails passed from the user, so we don't actually need to have that. So we don't need to have all of this inside our code. For now, we're just going to go ahead and delete all of them except for the first one, which is going to check for any sort of empty inputs. And then we do actually need to go after this one, and we do need to actually query the database because we need to actually grab the user from the database that they typed in using the username. And we need to check if the passwords match, because if this password the user just submitted matches with the user's password from within the database, then we do need to check for that as well. And of course, there's many different error handlers you could be doing when it comes to a login system. I think for now, just because this is a basic example, it is just enough just to check for empty inputs and check if the username exists inside the database. So does the user actually exist inside our database? And if the user exists, does the password actually match inside the database as well? So we have a couple of things we need to check for here. So what I'll do is I'll go inside my login_model file, and I'm actually going to query the database using the username provided by the user to see if the user exists inside the database. And if they do, then I do want to grab the password and check that up against the password the user submitted just now. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our PHP tags just like any other time we go inside a new file. And inside of this one, I'm going to create a function that simply goes in and gets the user. So we can say get_user. And I'm also going to go ahead and declare strict types because we did actually talk about that in the last episode. So we're going to declare that we want to use strict types. So we're going to say parentheses, strict_types. And I'm going to set this one equal to 1. This means that once we do actually get inside this function down here, we can also tell it that we want to require a certain data type and not just the variable, but the variable has to be a certain data type. So inside the parentheses, I want to get the connection. So we want to grab the variable PDO, which is the one we have inside our database connection here. So we can actually connect to the database in order to query it. The second thing we're going to pass in is going to be the username, because the username was given to us by the user. So if I were to go back inside my login.inc.php file, you can see that that we did actually get it up here. So just simply going to query the database using this username. Now, we did talk about strict types. So what I can do is I can actually say this is a object type. And then the second one over here is going to be a string type. Again, we talked about the PDO variable being a object that we created inside our connection. So whenever you use PDO, in order to connect to the database in this sort of way, we do that by creating a connection object using PDO. And we do that using this new keyword. So we instantiate a new object that is from the PDO class. Again, we're going to talk about this in the next episode, but this one is going to be our connection. So we do want to make sure we grab that and refer that to as an object, because that is what it is. And then we just have the username being a string because that is what the user gave us. So now inside this get user, we're simply going to go in and query the database. And we can actually go and copy paste because inside our signup_model, we do actually have very similar functions. So we can actually go in and just copy everything from inside just this first one up here called get username, just to grab one of them. And we're going to go back inside the model and simply paste that in. Now, everything is going to be the same except for our select statement up here, because right now we want to not just select the username, but we do want to select everything from inside this table here. So we're going to grab everything from the users table where a certain username is equal to username. So in the same way as we did before, then we create a prepared statement. We go in and bind the parameters to the placeholder. So right now we have this name parameter up here. So we just bind the username the user gave us. And then we execute it, and then we grab all the results from inside our database. Or at least we're grabbing one result from inside the database, because we're not fetching all of the data, but just fetch, which is just one piece of data or one row from inside the database. So with this basic function here, we can now just go in and query the database using a particular username, which means that we can actually go in and grab our login_controller and do a couple of other functions in order to check if the username exists inside the database. And we can also want to check if the passwords match inside the database, because the username has to use the right password. So I'm going to go inside my model again and just copy everything, go back inside my controller, paste it in, and just delete everything inside the function and change the function name to something else. Because in this case here, we might call this one is_username wrong. So _wrong. And inside the parameters here, we're just simply going to check for variable results, which was the one that we returned inside our model here, if we do actually have a result. But there is a small catch here, because if I query the database and we do actually have a user inside the database with that username, then I'm going to get this one as an array. However, if we do not have a user inside the database with that username, then this is going to return as a Boolean. So no longer as an array, but as a Boolean, because it's going to be false because there's no user inside the database. So how do we do that when it comes to strict types? Because if I were to go back here and say, okay, well, I want to require variable result to be of a certain data type. Because if I write array, then if I don't have the user inside the database, then we're going to get an error message because now the strict type is wrong. So if we were to type bool instead, which is a Boolean, then now it's going to be wrong if we actually do get a result from inside the database. So the solution here is that we can go in and write this pipe symbol and say we also want to accept an array. So now we're saying that if this is either a Boolean or an array, then we do want to accept the results. So this is how you can combine different data types and say that you want to accept just one type of data. So not just a string, but also a string and a Boolean if you wanted to. So just to show that this is how we can do that. Inside the function itself, we're going to write a if condition. I'm just going to copy paste from my code here because it is very simple. So going in, we're just going to create a if condition and we're going to check if result is equal to false, then return true. Because if it returns as false, it means that we did not find the user inside the database because we don't have any data inside this array here. Otherwise, return this as false, which means that we did not have any sort of error messages. I know the true false may logically seem like it switched around, but it's not really, because the function is called isUsername_wrong. And if this one is true, it means that it is wrong. And this is how we can simply check if the username exists inside the database. And I know we haven't actually used the function inside our login.inc.php file yet, but it will make sense in just a second. So what I'll do is I'll copy paste this function below here, and I'm going to check is password wrong? Because we do also need to check if the passwords do actually match, because we do have a password from the user that just tried to log in, and we do have a password inside the database, which by the way has been hashed. So we need to actually check these two against each other. And then we need to return this as true if they do not match each other, or false if they did match each other. The simple way to do this is just to go inside our parameters and say we want to get a string, which is going to be the password submitted by the user. And then we also do want to get another string, which is going to be the hashed password from inside our database. So hashed pwd. So grabbing these two different passwords, we can go inside the if condition and simply run a password underscore verify. And then we're just simply going to check these two different pieces of data up against each other. So we can check if password and hashed password do actually match each other. But we do need to keep an eye out here, because we are actually right now checking if the passwords do actually match each other, which if they do, then we're actually returning a error message. And that is the opposite of what we want to do. So we do need to make sure we go inside the if condition and do a exclamation mark in front of our password underscore verify, because now we're checking if this is equal to false. But now we do also have one last one we need to create, because going back inside our login.inc.php file, we do have one more error handler that we haven't actually addressed yet, which is right now is input empty. Because right now, this is actually the one that matches up with the sign up form and not the login form. Because as you can see, we have an email in here, so we can't just reuse it. And it is also just better to separate functionality. So, all the code for the login system in one place, and then all the code for the sign up system in another place, because that kind of goes into the MVC model pattern that we're going to talk about in a future episode. Okay, so we do need to create a function for checking is input empty inside our login underscore controller. So that is important. So going inside the login underscore controller, I'm just going to copy paste the function here, so you can just copy paste it as well. It's very basic. We just go in and create a function, and we call it is input empty. And then we just submit a username and a password, not an email this time around. And we just go inside our function and just do a if condition to check if username and password are empty. So with these functions here, we now have a very basic example of checking for different types of errors that might occur inside our login form. Again, if you want to add more, you can do that. For this tutorial here, we're just going to do these three for now. So going back inside the login form, we can actually make some adjustments. So right now we do actually have this is input empty, but I do want to make sure we delete the email. And again, this function here is something that we can actually grab because it's inside our login controller, which we did require right above it. So we do have access to this function. And then below here, we do actually want to run our model function, because we do want to actually grab any sort of data that might be inside the database where the username is equal to this particular username. So what I can actually do here is I can create a variable, and I'm going to call this one result. And I'm going to set it equal to get underscore user, which is the function we have inside our model. So inside our model file here, where we actually go in and we query the database and grab a user if he does exist. So we're going to grab a user, and we do also want to make sure we submit our database connection as well as our username. So we can actually go and say we have the username up here, which was the second parameter, by the way. So we do need to go in front and also grab our PDO connection. Again, the PDO connection is inside our database file, which is linked up here, so we can actually grab this one directly. And just like that, we now have a variable that has the results from the database query, where we go in and actually try to grab the user. So now we can use this in order to complete our next two error handlers, which we did create inside our controller here. So we do want to check if the username is wrong, and we do also want to check if our password is wrong. So after grabbing the data, we can run a simple if condition, just like up here when it came to the empty inputs. And we can check if our username is wrong by simply running this function that we just created inside our controller. And then we pass in our result that we just created in order to check if we did have any results from the database. If we did not, then we want to return a error called login underscore incorrect and incorrect login info. And all this does is that it creates a error message that we can grab once we do actually get back to the login form if there was any sort of error messages, and then we can display those errors inside the login form. So the next one I'm going to check for here is if the passwords actually do match. And again, we did create a function for checking that. So what I can do here is I can go below and I can run another if condition, but this time I do want to go in and check if the username is not wrong. So if it is actually a user that exists inside the database, but also if the password is incorrect. And you're going to notice inside our is password wrong, we just pass in our password, which was submitted by the user right up here. And we also pass in the password from inside our database query, so the one we grabbed inside variable results, which has a column name as password. So with these error handlers here, we basically just go in and check if the username exists and if we do actually have the passwords matching inside our database. So with that, we can now go back down inside our if condition that checks for any sort of errors inside the errors array. And I'm actually going to go and delete our session variable called signup_data and also the actual array called signup_data. And the reason for that is I do think that when a person types something incorrect inside a login form, I don't think that we should retype what they submitted into the login form. I think they have to start completely over with a username and a password. So it's a little bit different than the sign up form, where if they wrote one thing incorrect, but the email was correct and everything else, then we just, we don't want them to retype everything again because the sign up form can be lengthy. But in this case here, I do think that they should just type everything again. And again, just to go over what exactly this code does, because you may not remember it from the last episode, the require once we grab the config_session basically just goes in and grabs our session config file, which goes in and updates the session ID once in a while inside the cookie, inside your browser, session security things, so to speak. So inside our config_session, you can see that we set out some parameters and we update the cookie every once in a while, every 30 minutes. So now what we need to do here is a security thing, which is that whenever you have any sort of changes happening, when you log in a user inside a website or something else that, maybe some roles have changed inside the website, what you want to do is you want to make sure you always update the session ID cookie again when you make these changes. So when you log a user into the website, then update the session ID cookie, because that is just a good habit to have. So you don't have to wait every 30 minutes, from inside the config file. Just do it whenever something changes inside the website. But now we're going to do this in a slightly different way, because if I were to go back inside my config file, you can see that the way we did it before is by running a session_regenerate_ID, which is how we can take the current session ID that is inside our website and we then regenerate it, because if someone were to grab the session ID and stole it from us, then we can regenerate it to change it, so now it's no longer usable. But something we can actually do when it comes to a login system is we can actually grab our user's ID and combine that with our session ID from inside our session. And this is not something you have to do. This is something we're going to do together in this episode here, just so I can show you how to do it. But essentially there comes a couple of benefits to having the user's ID inside the session ID. For example, because you can associate some data together with the actual user that is using a particular session ID. So there is some benefits to it. And again, I'm just going to show you how to do it. And then you can determine whether or not you want to use it or not. Again, it's just an exercise to show you some different things. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back inside our login.inc.php file. And right below where we check for these error messages, the next thing I want to do is I do want to create a new variable. I'm going to call this one new session ID. Make sure we spell that correctly. And I'm going to set it equal to a function that I do think I've mentioned before in a previous episode, which is called session_create_ID. So this is not a session_regenerate ID. This is a session_create ID, which is a little bit different. So now this will actually create a entirely new ID instead of just regenerating the existing ID we have current inside the website. And what we can do then is we can actually append our user's ID together with this newly created ID that we just created. So if we were to go below here, I can go ahead and say I want to create a variable called session ID. And I'm going to set it equal to our new session ID that we just created up here. And then I'm just simply going to append a ID that we got from our variable results a little bit further up inside our code, because we did actually grab the user's data from inside the database. So if we were to grab the variable results, go down, I can actually append the ID of the user together with our session ID. So again, we're creating a new session ID, which is just for security. Just like we regenerate a new session ID, we now just create a new one. And then we just add our user's ID together with our session ID using a underscore, just so we can separate those, the ID from the user's ID. And now all we have to do is just go below here and say we want to run a session underscore ID function, which goes in and actually sets our session ID equal to a ID that we give it inside the parentheses here. So in this case, we can go in and tell it to set our session ID equal to what we just created up here with the user's ID. So again, a small trick here just to, create a new session ID inside our website using also the user's ID from the user we tried to log in inside our database here. And there is something we have to do here as well in regards to this, because right now we do have our user's ID together with our session ID. But what happens in 30 minutes when I go inside the config session code and it automatically updates the session ID in 30 minutes? Well, when it does that, we no longer have the user's ID part of our session ID because it is just regenerating the session ID without appending the user's ID in 30 minutes. So that is something we have to change inside our config file. So what we need to do here is we do actually need to check if the user is currently logged in or if they're not logged into the website. Because if they are logged into the website, then I do want to make sure that when we regenerate the session ID, that we do so using the user's current ID. So inside our if condition at the bottom here, where we go in and update this every 30 minutes, I do want to create another if condition. So again, now we're going to start to have some nesting going on, but I think it's okay for now. And I'm simply going to go inside my parentheses and check if we currently have a user logged into the website by checking if we have a current session variable that is equal to user underscore ID, or at least that is named user underscore ID. So by going in here, we can say we have a variable underscore session, which is a super global. We have talked about this one plenty of times by now. So we go in and we check if we have a user underscore ID, which we haven't created yet, by the way. This is something we will create once we actually log the user in inside our login.inc.php file. Just know for now that we will have a session variable called user underscore ID when the user is logged in. Okay. Then I'm going to create a else condition. So we're going to say else. And inside the else condition, we want to run the code that is going to get run when the user is not logged into the website. So that would actually be the code that we have here already. So we would copy paste that inside my else condition. This is now getting run if the user is not logged into the website. But what if the user is logged into the website? Because now we need to change things a little bit here. All we have to do is we need to go inside the if condition, paste in the same code again, but instead of running our regenerate underscore session ID, which is a function that we created down here, we're going to create a new function that is going to go in and append the user's ID once we do actually regenerate the ID inside once we're logged into the website. So all we need to do here is create a new function called regenerate underscore session underscore ID underscore logged in. And the same thing down here for regenerate underscore session underscore ID logged in. Then we scroll down inside our function here and just copy paste it because we do need to have another function for when we're logged in. So I'm going to change the name of one of these to logged in. And we're going to keep the same code as we have in here because we do still need to use this code. We do need to make sure we write true inside these parentheses here though, inside both functions, because we forgot to do that in the last episode. So after regenerating the ID, we're going to do the exact same thing as we did inside our login.inc.php file. So I'm just going to go in, I'm going to go down here where we actually regenerated the ID using our ID from the user. So I'm going to copy that, go back in, paste it in. But we do need to change one thing here, which is that right now we don't have a result called ID because that is specific to that particular file in there. But we do have a session variable that does exist called user underscore ID if the user is logged in. So we can actually take that one, go down here, create a new variable. We can call this one user ID and set it equal to our session variable called user underscore ID. And then we can use that ID instead of our result from the database because, like I said, it's inside that other file, so we can't access this variable specifically. But we can access a user ID from our session variable if we're logged into the website. So again, just to recap here, we're going in, we're generating the ID, which we technically don't have to. We could delete this if we wanted to. We're grabbing the user ID from our session variable if we're logged in. Then we're going down and creating a new session ID by using this session_create_ID. Then we're going in and saying that we want to set a session ID equal to the new session ID we just created and the user ID from the user. And then we're just simply going in and saying that we want to set the session ID equal to this session ID up here. And then we update the time for when we last regenerated the session ID because now it needs to wait 30 minutes until it will automatically go in and again regenerate this using the user's ID if we're logged in. This may be the most confusing part of this video, by the way. Again, just know that we're going inside the website and updating the session ID by adding the user's ID with it as well to create some fancy new things we can do potentially if we wanted to do that in the future. We're not going to do anything with it in this video here. It's just to show you that you can do it. So inside our login.inc.php file, at this point here, we do actually have a user that tried to sign up with a username that exists inside the database and also a password that matches with the password inside the database. So what we can do is we can actually sign up the user inside our website. The way we're going to do that is first of all by setting the appropriate session variables. So we're going to say we have a session variable and we're going to call this one user_ID, which, by the way, inside the config_session, we are checking for if the user is logged in into the website. And we're going to set this one equal to the ID from inside our database. So we can actually go ahead and set this one equal to our result from our database query and the ID column from inside the database, which is the ID of this particular user here. So I can copy paste this down. And then we might also include maybe the username. So the user_username. Just so we have it available to us so we don't have to query the database every single time if I just want to grab the username of the user. So with this, we can set it equal to username because that is the name of our database column. But now I do want to do something else here because we might actually take this username and print it out in our website somewhere. We might try to echo it out because I want to show the user who they're logged in as right now inside the website. So we do need to make sure we do some security. So we're going to use HTML special characters and make sure we run a sanitation of variable result, just to make sure everything has been sanitized to avoid any sort of potential cross-site scripting that might be happening inside the website here. And with that, I do want to do one more thing, which is to go in and actually reset the timer for when we have to update our session ID because we just did so. So why not go in and just reset the timer for that? So I'm going to go inside my config_session and I'm just simply going to go down and grab our session variable called last regeneration, which is equal to time, copy that entire line of code, go back in, and right below here where we actually create these session variables, I'm just going to go ahead and create that one as well by setting it equal to the current time. So now we reset the time so that in 30 minutes, it's going to update itself again. And just like that, we now have a login system. So we can actually go below here, create a header function to send the user back to the front page with a login equal to success message. We can also go ahead and close off the statement and our connection because the prepared statement and the connection, it does get automatically closed, but it is just a good habit, best practice, so to speak, to actually close it manually inside your code. So we're going to go and do that as well. So right below the header function, I'm just going to say we want to close off the PDO and the prepared statement. And the last thing we're going to do is to create a die function, essentially just terminating the script at this point here. So now we have a login system that should be working inside our website, but let's actually go back inside our index page and make sure if we have any sort of error messages related to the login form, for example, submitting the wrong password or a username that doesn't exist inside the database, then we want to output that error message inside our form, or at least below the form inside our front page. So going below the login form, I'm going to go down and open up my PHP tags. And inside here, we're going to refer to a function called check_login_errors. And this is a function we haven't created yet because this is going to actually output something inside the website, which means that it needs to go inside our view. So going inside our login_view, you can see that right now we have nothing. So what I'm going to do to begin with here is open up the PHP tags and open up the strict mode and all that. So I'm going to go inside one of the other ones that I have here and just kind of open up what we have here. So we have the beginning of the PHP tag, we have the declare strict types, and then we're going to create the function that we just had inside our index page. So I'm just going to go and drag this over so we can actually see it. And I'm going to copy the function name inside the index page, go back inside my login_view, and say I want to create a function that has a name set to check_login_errors. So inside this function, we're going to run a if condition. And I want to check if we have a certain session variable set currently inside the website. So if we have a isSet parentheses, and we have a session variable that is called error_login. So errors_login. And this is something we actually do need to change inside our login.inc.php file. So if we were to copy the name here, go inside the login.inc.php and scroll up to our error messages, you can see that right now we're creating a session variable called errors_signup because we copy pasted this from our signup form. So we do need to make sure we're going to change that to errors_login. And then if we have any sort of error messages, then I want to go inside this if condition and simply create a variable called errors and set it equal to the session variable that has all the error messages inside of it. So we're just going to set it equal to variable_session errors_login. Because by doing that, we can now go below here and we can actually unset the session variable. Because remember, if there's any sort of information inside our session variables that is no longer needed, then we need to make sure we unset it, to clean it out. So in between here, I'm just going to go ahead and echo out a break just to get some distance between our form and the error message that we're going to print out. And then I'm going to run a for each loop because we do actually want to go in and make sure that we take all the error messages inside our variable errors and print them out below each other inside our login form or below the login form, just like we did when it came to the signup form. So inside my for each loop, I'm simply going to echo out a paragraph that has a class set inside of it, which I did style inside my style sheet. And I'm just simply going to print out a error. So I'm going to go inside our parameters up here for the for each loop. And I'm going to say that I have a errors array. And I want to refer to error whenever I refer to one of these errors inside the array. And then because I refer to error in between the paragraph down here, we just simply spit out the error that we might be getting inside our form. So with that, we now just need to create a success message if we did actually not have any sort of errors. So going below here, I can create a else if. And I'm just simply going to check if we had any sort of success message inside the URL when we did send the user back with a login success message. So we're going to use a get method in order to grab a login, and we're going to check if it is equal to success. And again, just to show you where this happens, if we were to go back inside our login.inc.php file, at the bottom here, when we do actually send the user back, you can see that inside the URL, we have login equal to success. And that is what we're checking for here. And now we need to do one more thing before we can actually test this out, because right now inside the index page, we are referring to a check_login_errors, which is inside our view file, but we did not actually link to our view file at the top here. So we need to go up here and say we have a login_view.inc.php file. So now we do actually have access to this function in here. So if we were to go inside our website, and let's go ahead and sign up as a new user because I don't actually remember the password from the user we created in the last episode. So let's just go ahead and go in here and say we have John Doe. And we're going to say we have a password that is 123, which is most likely what I used in the last episode as well. So john@gmail.com. I'm just going to go ahead and sign up this new user. And then you can see, oh, sign up success. And now we can actually go inside our login form and we can test this out. So if we were to say John Doe with capitalized D and capitalized J, and then 123 login, then you can see we get login success. If I were to try and go in and actually log in with something that does not exist inside the database, let's actually go and leave this one empty. You can see, oh, fill in all fields, incorrect login info. If I were to pick something in both fields, then you can see we get incorrect login info because SAF does not exist inside our database as a user. If I were to use John Doe, but use a incorrect password, then you can see we get incorrect login info because this was not the correct password. So everything is working exactly like intended, but now a question that people may have is, okay, so we have this login system, But how do we change content inside the website once we're logged in? Because that is important to do too. Before we do that, let's actually go and create a logout button, because I do want to be able to log out the user as well, because right now we're just logging in as one user and then trying to log in as another user, but we're not actually logging out at any point. So going inside the index page here, I'm going to create a new form. I'm just going to call this one logout. So I'm going to copy paste this one, and let's go ahead and put this one at the bottom. So I'm going to say logout like so, and we're going to refer to a logout.inc.php file. And we're not going to have any sort of inputs in here. We're just going to have a logout button. Then I'm going to go in and actually create a new file inside my includes folder. So I'm going to say new file, call it logout.inc.php. And inside this file here, we're just going to open up our PHP tags, go down and say we want to create a session underscore start, because we do want to start a session in order to actually destroy it. And then below, we're going to go and say session underscore unset. And then we're going to say session underscore destroy. And then we can actually send the user back to the front page. So we can actually copy paste that from, let's say, our login.inc.php file. So we were to go down to the bottom here, we have a header that sends the user back, and we have a die function. So we can copy those and paste those in. So if we were to go inside my website, refresh everything, you can see we have a logout button. So if we were to actually log in using John Doe, 1, 2, 3, log in, then you can see we are logged in as John Doe. Well, you can't actually see it because you can't see if we're logged in or not, but we do get a login success message. And then if I want to, I can log out down here, and then I will be logged out again. So now the question is, how do we change content inside the website when we're logged in, when we're not logged in, because we need to change content, because that's the whole point, right? We create a login system so we can log a user in and then change content inside the website. So they might have a profile page or something. So the way we can do that is, if I were to go back inside our view for the login system, is I'm actually going to go and create a function to print out the username when we're logged in. So we can actually see the username inside the website, and it says you are logged in as, and then the name of the username. So I'm going to create a basic function. I'm just going to copy paste it here, which is called output underscore username. And then inside we have a if condition that simply goes in and checks, are we currently logged in, by checking if we have a user underscore ID, because if that exists, that means we're logged into the website. And if we're logged in, we're just simply going to go in and output you are logged in as, and then we're going to grab the username from inside our session variable. Again, that's why we wanted to set that as a session variable when we did actually log in previously. And if we're not logged in, we're just simply going to say you are not logged in. And then we can use this function, we can copy it, go inside our index page, and just simply output it somewhere maybe above our login form. So we can say we have let's create a H3, and we're going to go ahead and say we want to have a PHP tag opening and closing in here. And then we're just simply going to run this function here. So anytime you want to change anything inside the website, if you're logged into the website, again, all you have to do is run a if condition that checks if currently we have a session variable that is called user underscore ID. And that is all you need to check for. If that exists, then change the content. Again, by echoing something out or creating some HTML or something. So if I were to go back inside the website, you can now see that when I refresh, it says you are not logged in because we're not logged in. But if I were to go down here and log in as John Doe, 1, 2, 3, log in, then you can see we get you are logged in as John Doe. And again, if I were to go down to the bottom here, log out, then you can see, oh, you are not logged in because we destroyed all the session data with the session variable. And now we're no longer logged into the website. And we can do the same thing when it comes to the forms. So if we were to go in here and say, you know what, let's go inside our view and just copy this if condition, go inside our index page, and let's say we only want to see the login form if we are currently not logged into the website, because there's no need to have a login form if we're already logged in, right? So if we were to go in here, we can go ahead and open up the PHP tags and close it off again. We're going to paste in the if condition here, and then we can just go in and actually include the form inside the if condition for when we're not logged in. So what we can do here is we can say, okay, so if we are not currently logged in, and instead of echoing out you are logged in as, and then the username, we can just go in and we can copy paste the form and paste it inside our condition here. So I'm going to copy the form, delete it, go inside, and I'm just going to go ahead and close off my PHP tags here, just because it makes it a little bit easier. So again, opening and closing the PHP tags wrapped around the closing bracket, and also opening and closing it wrapped around the first if condition line of code here, because that allows for us to go in and paste in HTML and still have it be part of the PHP. Again, this is PHP syntax good practices 101. So instead of, putting this in as a string by echoing all of this out, we can just write HTML code directly inside by simply opening and closing the closing bracket, and the same thing for the opening bracket. So if I were to go in here and do this, then you can see that if I were to go inside the website, refresh it, right now we're not logged into the website, so we can see the form. But if I were to go in and log in as John Doe 123, then you can see that, oh, okay, the login form disappeared because we no longer need to see it. And that is how you can simply go inside a website and change content based on if you're logged in or if you're not logged in. And you can do the same thing for the sign up form. That could also disappear, by the way. And the same thing for the logout form. Maybe that should not be there when you're not logged into the website because it doesn't make any sort of sense. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this little episode on how to create a login system. And I'll see you guys in the next video.